They called Earth a nursery world, a gentle paradise where soft, weak creatures evolved without challenge. The Galactic Council's xenobiologists laughed at humanity's pale skin, fragile bones, and primitive technology. How adorable, they said, that these hairless apes think they can survive beyond their cozy little planet. But the galaxy had forgotten something important about nursery worlds. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that learn to hunt in paradise. And when humanity finally stepped into the darkness between stars, they brought with them something no alien civilization had ever encountered. The cold, calculated fury of a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing their own kind. The universe was about to learn why evolution's greatest mistake is underestimating the creature that survived it. The first time Ambassador Zektar saw a human, he merely choked on his ceremonial drink. The creature standing before the Galactic Council was impossibly frail. Pink skin that looked like it would tear at the slightest touch. No natural armor. No claws. No fangs. Its eyes were a disturbing pale blue, like ice that might shatter. When it spoke, its voice was soft, almost musical. "Honored Council," the human said, bowing slightly. "I am Captain Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Federation. We come seeking membership in your galactic community." A ripple of barely contained laughter swept through the assembled representatives. Zektar himself had to cover his mandibles to hide his amusement. This pathetic creature thought it belonged among the mighty races of the galaxy? His own people, the Korthak, had evolved on a world where the very air was toxic, and the ground shifted like liquid. They stood 3 meters tall, their exoskeletons harder than most starship armor. And here was this tiny, soft thing asking to join their ranks. Council Speaker Borthan leaned forward on his crystalline throne, his 6 eyes gleaming with condescension. "Tell us, little human, what could your species possibly offer the Galactic Council? We are composed of civilizations that have conquered death worlds, species that have survived cosmic disasters, races that have mastered the fundamental forces of the universe." Captain Chen's expression didn't change, but Zektar noticed something odd in her pale eyes. A flicker of something that made his combat instincts twitch. "We offer our friendship, our knowledge, and our willingness to contribute to galactic peace and prosperity." The laughter was no longer contained. Representatives from dozens of worlds filled the chamber with their various sounds of amusement, chittering, roaring, harmonic vibrations. Even the usually stoic Veltharians were making their equivalent of chuckles. "Your knowledge?" boomed General Krex of the Thanoid Empire. "What knowledge could a nursery world species possibly possess? Your people haven't even left your own solar system until now. You have no concept of real warfare, real survival, real challenge." Zektar studied the human more carefully. She was small even by her own species' standards, he'd been told, barely reaching his chest in height. Her uniform was simple, utilitarian, without the elaborate displays of power that marked truly advanced civilizations. Yet something about her stillness bothered him. On his homeworld, the most dangerous predators were often the ones that waited. "Perhaps," Captain Chen said quietly, "you would allow us to demonstrate our capabilities through a standard evaluation?" This caused another wave of laughter. The standard evaluation was the Council's way of quickly determining whether a new species was worth considering. It involved a series of challenges designed to test military prowess, technological advancement, and survival skills. Most applicant species spent decades preparing for it. Some never attempted it at all, knowing they would fail. "You wish to take the evaluation now?" Vorthan asked, his tone suggesting he found the idea delightfully absurd. "Without preparation? Without even understanding what it entails?" "We've been preparing our entire existence," Chen replied. Zektar felt that twitch in his instincts again. There was something in the way she said it, not boastful, not threatening, just matter-of-fact, like someone stating an obvious truth. The evaluation began within hours. The first test was technological, a complex engineering challenge that required building a functional faster-than-light communicator from basic components. Most species took several days to complete it, and many failed entirely. The humans completed it in 4 hours and somehow made it 30% more efficient than the baseline design. "Interesting," muttered Dr. Shendai, the Council's chief technologist. "They approached the problem from an angle we've never seen before. Very creative." The second test was survival. Candidates were dropped on Kesh 4, a Class 12 death world where the very atmosphere was corrosive, and the native life forms considered starship hull metal a delicacy. Most species brought elaborate environmental suits and survival gear. The humans brought basic clothing and what looked like camping equipment. Zektar watched the feeds with growing unease. Instead of finding shelter and waiting for extraction like sensible beings, the humans split into small groups and began exploring. They sampled the toxic water and somehow made it drinkable. They studied the aggressive native plants and turned several species into food sources. When a pack of metal-eating predators surrounded one group, the humans didn't run. They set a trap using the creature's own feeding instincts against them. "They're treating it like a vacation," whispered an observer. By the end of the survival test, the humans had not only survived but had established a small base camp and were already mapping the planet's resources. When the extraction team arrived, Captain Chen politely asked if they could have a few more days to finish their survey. The third test was combat. This was where every council member expected the soft little humans to finally break. The combat evaluation pitted candidates against a series of opponents, starting with simple automated drones and escalating to live combat with volunteer warriors from various member species. Zektar volunteered himself, confident that he could end this charade quickly and humanely. He was a decorated veteran of 17 campaigns, his exoskeleton inscribed with the marks of countless victories. He would defeat the human cleanly, without permanent injury, and this ridiculous application would be over. The human who entered the combat arena was smaller than Captain Chen, a young male who introduced himself simply as Sergeant Rodriguez. He carried no weapons, wore no armor, just the same simple uniform they all seemed to prefer. Zektar felt almost guilty about what he was about to do. "Begin when ready," announced the combat overseer. Zektar charged forward, his massive claws extended, intending to grab the human and pin him gently but decisively. It should have been over in seconds. Instead, he found himself face down on the arena floor, with his own arm twisted behind his back in a position that shouldn't have been anatomically possible. The human's grip was like liquid metal, yielding when Zektar pushed against it, but somehow redirecting all his strength and momentum into exactly the wrong direction. "Yield," the human said quietly. And Zektar realized with shock that he was completely helpless. Somehow, this tiny creature had turned Zektar's own size and strength against him. He yielded. The next volunteer was quicker, more cautious. She lasted longer. The one after that brought weapons. None of it mattered. The human adapted to each opponent with disturbing ease, reading their movements, exploiting weaknesses they didn't even know they had. He never seemed to exert real effort, never showed anger or frustration. He simply won. After the 7th consecutive victory, no one else volunteered. "Sufficient demonstration," Captain Chen said calmly when the combat overseer looked uncertain. "We understand the evaluation continues with strategic scenarios." The strategic test was conducted in simulation, with candidates required to command fleets in theoretical conflicts against various galactic threats. Most species showed their preferred tactical doctrines. The Korthak favored overwhelming force, the Valtharians preferred precise surgical strikes, the Thanoids relied on superior technology. The humans did something different. They cheated. Not in any way that violated the rules, but they approached every scenario with a creativity that bordered on madness. When faced with a superior enemy fleet, they didn't engage in honorable battle. They hacked the enemy's communications and convinced half the fleet that the other half had turned traitor. When confronted with an impregnable fortress, they didn't assault it. They convinced the defenders' allies that the fortress was actually a secret weapon pointed at them. "This is not how warfare is conducted," General Krex protested after watching the humans turn a simple fleet engagement into a 7-way civil war, using nothing but misinformation and psychological manipulation. "It's how we've always conducted it," Captain Chen replied. "Perhaps that's why we're still here." Zektar stared at the tactical displays, his mind reeling. Every one of these scenarios was based on actual historical conflicts from the galaxy's past. The humans had solved them all, but not through superior firepower or technology. They'd solved them through understanding something that the galaxy's mightiest civilizations had somehow missed, that the greatest weakness of any enemy was the enemy themselves. The evaluation concluded with unprecedented scores across all categories. The humans had not just passed, they had redefined what passing meant. But instead of the triumph Zektar expected to see, Captain Chen simply nodded, as if this had been a foregone conclusion. "Impressive," Vorthan admitted grudgingly. "You have certainly demonstrated capabilities we did not anticipate. However, the Council must consider not just your abilities, but your character. Tell us, Captain Chen, how did your species develop such unusual skills?"
For the first time since entering the chamber, Chen's expression shifted slightly.
Not to anger or pride, but to something that made Zektar's survival instincts scream warnings he couldn't understand. We learned them from each other, she said simply. For our entire recorded history, humans have been our own greatest enemy. We've spent 10,000 years finding new and innovative ways to kill our own kind. We perfected the art of turning our opponent's strengths against them because we've been doing it to ourselves since we learned to throw rocks. The chamber fell silent. The implications of her words slowly sank in. Every strategy we used in your evaluation, every technique, every approach, we learned it fighting other humans. We've survived ice ages and plagues, world wars and nuclear weapons, not because we were the strongest or the fastest or the toughest, but because we were the most creative at surviving each other. She paused, and Zektar realized he was holding his breath. You call Earth a nursery world, and perhaps by your standards it is. But it's a nursery that produced a species capable of 37 different methods of ending all life on their planet, and wise enough to step back from 36 of them. We're not here because we're the strongest or the smartest. We're here because we're the ones left standing, after 10 millennia of fighting the most dangerous predators in our local galaxy cluster, ourselves. The silence stretched on until Vorthan finally spoke. The Council will consider your application. You will be notified of our decision within the standard period. As the humans filed out of the chamber, Zektar caught Captain Chen's arm. What you said about your species' history, was that meant as a warning? She looked up at him with those pale, ice-blue eyes, and for a moment he saw something in them that made him understand why his ancestors had learned to fear the dark. Ambassador Zektar, she said quietly, that wasn't a warning. That was an introduction. 3 days later, the Council received a priority transmission from the Outer Rim. The Veltharian mining colony on Zerion Prime had gone silent. Long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures consistent with an unknown but extremely advanced military force. A full battle fleet was dispatched to investigate. They found the colony intact but empty, its entire population simply gone. No signs of struggle, no evidence of weapons fire, no trace of the missing colonists. The only clue was a single message, transmitted on an obsolete frequency. Moments before all communication ceased. The Devourers have returned. Run. As panic spread through the outer systems and the Council convened emergency sessions, Captain Chen received a private communication at the human diplomatic quarters. The message was brief. Your evaluation period has been accelerated. Report to the Council chamber immediately. And Captain, bring your friends. The emergency council session was unlike anything Zektar had witnessed in his 40 years of diplomatic service. Representatives who normally postured and politicked with careful ceremony now spoke in clipped, urgent tones. Holographic displays showed the spreading chaos across the Outer Rim. 7 more colonies had gone silent in the past 18 hours. Captain Chen entered the chamber flanked by 5 other humans, each wearing the same simple uniform but with subtle differences that Zektar was beginning to recognize as rank indicators. Unlike their previous visit, these humans carried equipment cases and wore expressions that seemed almost eager. Captain Chen, Vorthan began without preamble, I will dispense with diplomatic protocols. We are facing a crisis that threatens the stability of our entire civilization. The Devourers are a force we thought eliminated 3,000 years ago. A nomadic species that consumes entire worlds, leaving nothing behind but barren rock. The main display activated, showing grainy footage from the last known encounter with the Devourers. Massive bioships, each larger than a moon, swarmed through space like living creatures. Where they passed, planets withered and died, their atmospheres stripped away, their resources consumed down to the planetary core. Our ancestors barely survived the first Devourer War, continued General Krex, his usually boastful tone subdued. It took the combined might of 47 species and 200 years of continuous warfare to drive them into the dark spaces between galaxies. The cost was, he paused, mandibles clicking with distress. We lost over half our worlds. Entire species were rendered extinct. One of the humans, an older woman with silver hair and general's insignia, raised her hand. Excuse me, but when you say drive them away, do you mean you defeated them or just encouraged them to leave? The silence that followed was answer enough. We made it too costly for them to continue their harvest, Admiral Zenthahara of the Veltharian Navy admitted. They withdrew to digest what they had taken and seek easier prey elsewhere. We always knew they would return eventually. The silver-haired human nodded thoughtfully. I'm General Patricia Morrison, United Earth Federation Strategic Command. Let me make sure I understand the situation. You have an enemy that's technologically superior, numerically overwhelming, and has no interest in negotiation or coexistence. They consume planets for resources and view all other life as either food or obstacles. And your previous strategy was to make yourselves too expensive to eat? The combined fleets of the Galactic Council represent the mightiest military force in known space, General Krex protested. Our technology has advanced considerably in 3 millennia. Has theirs? Another uncomfortable silence. Captain Chen stepped forward. General Morrison, what's your assessment?
Well, Captain, it sounds like they're fighting the last war.
Classic mistake. Assuming your enemy remained static while you evolved. Morrison turned to address the Council directly. May I ask what your current battle plans involve? Verthan gestured, and the display shifted to show fleet formations and defensive positions. We are consolidating our forces at key strategic points, fortress worlds with maximum defensive capabilities. Our plan is to force them into siege warfare where our technological advantages will be most effective. Morrison studied the displays for several moments, then looked back at her fellow humans with an expression that somehow conveyed entire conversations. You're planning to let them choose the time and place of engagement? You're going to wait behind fortifications for an enemy that eats planets. It is the only logical strategy, Admiral Zenthara insisted. We cannot match their numbers in open space. Our only hope is to leverage defensive advantages. No, said another human. This one younger with captain's bars. Your only hope was that they wouldn't come back. Now that they have, your only hope is to think differently. Zektar watched the exchange with growing unease. The humans weren't offering assistance or asking for briefings. They were analyzing the situation like predators sizing up prey. Not the devourers, but the Council's own strategies. What would you suggest, Verthan asked, his tone carefully neutral. Morrison smiled, and Zektar finally understood why human expressions had been making his instincts scream warnings. That smile was the same one his homeworld's apex predators wore when they'd cornered their prey. We'd suggest you let us handle this. The chamber erupted in protests. Representatives from dozens of worlds voiced their outrage at the suggestion that a species barely beyond their own solar system could succeed where the galaxy's greatest civilizations had failed. Impossible, General Krex roared. Your entire species has perhaps a dozen ships capable of interstellar travel. The Devourers field thousands of bioships, each capable of cracking a planet's crust. You're thinking about this wrong. Captain Chen said, her voice cutting through the chaos with quiet authority. You're thinking about it like a conventional war. Ships versus ships, weapons versus shields. But that's not what this is. This is pest control. Zektar felt his exoskeleton shiver. The casual way she'd said it, not defeating an enemy or defending civilization, just pest control. Morrison activated her own portable display, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. The Devourers follow predictable patterns because they're driven by biological imperatives. They're not a military force. They're a swarm species. Very dangerous, very efficient, but ultimately just very large bugs with very large appetites. Red dots appeared on the map, showing Devourer movements over the past weeks. Look at their approach vectors. They're not making strategic decisions. They're following scent trails, moving from the richest resource concentrations to the next. It's sophisticated, but it's still fundamentally animal behavior. And humans, added the younger captain, have a long history with pest control. The next few hours were unlike anything in Council history. Instead of formal debates and careful diplomatic language, the chamber became something resembling a military briefing room. The humans spread out charts, tactical displays, and equipment specifications with casual efficiency. The key insight, Morrison explained, is that you can't defeat a swarm by fighting it like an army. Swarms adapt, they flow around obstacles, they overwhelm defensive positions through sheer numbers. But swarms also have critical vulnerabilities that armies don't. She highlighted several points on the galactic map. Swarms need coordination. They need communication systems. They need pheromone trails or equivalent markers to guide the group behavior. Disrupt any of these and the swarm doesn't just weaken, it collapses into chaos. Zektar studied the human proposals with growing amazement and horror. Where the Council had planned massive defensive fleets and extended siege warfare, the humans proposed surgical strikes against seemingly insignificant targets. Where the Council saw the need for overwhelming firepower, the humans saw opportunities for misdirection and sabotage. Your bioships, Captain Chen noted, reviewing Devourer specifications. They're living creatures. They need to eat, they need to rest, They need to reproduce. Those aren't weaknesses in individual combat, but they're massive vulnerabilities for a species that operates as a single macroorganism.
You want to poison them, Admiral Xanthara said, her voice flat with disbelief. We want to make them sick, Morrison corrected.
Specifically, we want to introduce genetic malware into their food supply. Something that won't kill them immediately, but will disrupt their communication systems and make them confused. The display shifted to show a molecular diagram that made several council members recoil in shock. This is a modified virus originally developed for agricultural pest control on Earth. We've adapted it for xenobiological applications. It's designed to interfere with neural pathway formation in hive mind species. This is monstrous, protested Dr. Shendai. You're talking about biological warfare on a massive scale. The ethical implications, Captain Chen said quietly, are that either we stop them or they consume every living world in the galaxy. Everything else is academic. General Morrison continued the briefing with the same casual professionalism she might have used to discuss weather patterns. Phase 1 involves seeding their advanced scouts with the genetic malware. We've identified 17 likely infection vectors based on their feeding patterns. Phase 2 exploits the communication breakdown to fragment their forces. Phase 3 is cleanup.
What kind of cleanup? Sektar asked, though part of him already knew he didn't want the answer.
The humans exchanged another of those silent conversations.
The kind that ensures they don't come back, Morrison said finally. Over the following days, Sektar watched the humans work with a mixture of fascination and growing dread. They moved through the crisis with surgical precision, coordinating with military units across dozens of species, as if they'd been planning for this exact scenario their entire lives. Perhaps most disturbing was their apparent complete comfort with the moral complexity of what they were doing. When Veltharian ethicists raised concerns about the potential long-term effects of genetic warfare, the humans listened politely and then continued with their preparations. When Korthak military leaders questioned the reliability of biological weapons, the humans provided detailed test data and statistical analyses. They're not struggling with this decision at all, Sektar confided to his aide. They've calculated the acceptable losses and moved on. It's like they've done this before. Sir, his aide replied hesitantly, I've been researching human military history. They have done this before. Multiple times. To their own species. The first reports came in 3 days after the human operation began. Devourer scout ships had started exhibiting erratic behavior, breaking formation and attacking each other. Some had simply stopped moving entirely, drifting in space like vast corpses. Infection rate is at 67% and climbing, reported Captain Chen. Neural disruption is proceeding within expected parameters. We should see major behavioral changes in the main swarm within the next 48 hours. She was right. The Devourer advance, which had been systematically consuming its way through the outer rim, suddenly fragmented into dozens of smaller groups moving in seemingly random directions. Some turned back toward empty space. Others began attacking installations they'd previously ignored. Several groups simply disappeared entirely. It's working, Admiral Xanthara said, her voice filled with amazement. They're falling apart. Phase 1 complete, Morrison announced, initiating Phase 2. Phase 2 was psychological warfare on a scale that made the biological attack seem gentle by comparison. The humans had somehow reverse-engineered Devourer communication systems and began flooding their networks with false information, phantom fleet positions, imaginary resource concentrations, fake distress signals from their own forces. Within days, the galaxy watched in stunned disbelief as the most feared predator species in known history turned on itself in an orgy of confused violence. Bioships that had survived 3 millennia in the dark spaces between galaxies destroyed each other over resources that didn't exist. How are you doing this? Vorthan asked during one of the daily briefings. The psychological profiles we have on the Devourers suggest they're virtually immune to deception. Their hive mind should filter out false information automatically. Captain Chen looked up from her tactical displays. Their hive mind is exactly why it works. They never evolved skepticism because they never needed it. Every piece of information they've ever received came from their own sensory organs or from other members of their swarm. They have no concept of lies because they've never encountered a species creative enough to lie to them effectively. Until now, Sektar said quietly. Until now. Phase 3 began a week later. By then, the great Devourer swarm had been reduced to scattered fragments. most of which were too busy fighting each other to pose any threat to galactic civilization. The humans moved through the debris field of what had once been an unstoppable force with clinical efficiency. They showed no mercy. They showed no hesitation. They hunted down every surviving bioship and every Devourer refuge with methodical thoroughness. When they found evidence of Devourer breeding colonies hidden in asteroid fields, they sterilized them completely. When they discovered Devourer sleeper agents embedded in the galaxy's communication networks, they rooted them out and eliminated them. "You're committing genocide, Dr. Dahl," Shendai accused during one particularly brutal engagement report.
Yes,
Captain Chen agreed without emotion.
The Devourers represent an existential threat to all other life in the galaxy. They cannot be reasoned with, they cannot be contained, and they cannot be allowed to survive.
Sometimes the only ethical choice is the unthinkable one. The war that the galaxy's greatest civilizations had expected to last decades ended in 3 weeks. The humans had not just defeated the Devourers, they had eliminated them so completely that xenoarchaeologists would struggle to find evidence they had ever existed. As the final reports came in, and the last Devourer bioships were confirmed destroyed, the council chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence. The humans had saved galactic civilization, but in doing so, they had demonstrated capabilities that made their earlier evaluation performances seem like children's games. "Well," Vorthan said finally, "I suppose the question of your membership application has been answered." Captain Chen nodded politely.
"We appreciate your confidence in our species, Council Speaker. However, there is one more matter we need to discuss."
She activated a holographic display that made every representative in the chamber freeze in their seats. It showed detailed intelligence files on every major military installation, every strategic resource, every defensive system operated by every member species of the Galactic Council. During our operation against the Devourers, we naturally required comprehensive intelligence on galactic infrastructure to coordinate our efforts effectively. We now possess detailed knowledge of your civilization's capabilities, weaknesses, and strategic assets. The silence was deafening. "We want to assure you that this information will remain confidential and will be used solely for mutual defense purposes. However, we feel it's important that our new relationship be based on complete honesty about our respective positions." Zektar stared at the display, his mind reeling. In 3 weeks, these apparently primitive creatures hadn't just saved the galaxy. They had quietly positioned themselves to conquer it if they chose to, and they were politely informing the Council of this fact as a courtesy. "What do you want?" General Krex asked, his voice barely a whisper. Captain Chen's expression softened slightly, and for a moment she looked almost human again rather than like something that had crawled out of every council member's worst nightmares. "We want what we've always wanted, General. We want to be good neighbors. We want to contribute to galactic peace and prosperity. We want to explore the universe and learn from the wisdom of older civilizations." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the same quiet certainty that had marked everything these terrifying creatures did. "But if anyone ever threatens that peace, if anyone ever mistakes our desire for friendship as a sign of weakness, if anyone ever forces us to choose between being good neighbors and protecting our interests," she gestured to the intelligence files. "Well?" "The Devourers learned what happens when you threaten humanity's home. We'd prefer not to have to teach that lesson twice." 6 months after the Devourer War, as historians were already calling it, Zektar found himself in the strangest position of his diplomatic career. He was serving as the Galactic Council's official liaison to humanity, a role that required him to spend considerable time on Earth studying human culture and society. What he discovered there shattered every assumption he had ever held about the nature of civilization itself. Earth was indeed a paradise world by galactic standards. Vast blue oceans, breathable atmosphere, abundant plant life, and a single large moon that stabilized the planet's weather patterns. It should have produced a species of gentle philosophers and artists, beings who knew nothing of hardship or survival. Instead, as Captain Chen had warned, it had produced the most creatively violent species in the known galaxy. "Tell me about your wars," Zektar asked Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins, a human historian assigned to educate him about Earth's past. They sat in a garden outside the United Nations building in Geneva, surrounded by flowers that would have been considered impossibly beautiful on most worlds. "Which ones?" she asked with dark amusement. "We've been fighting each other for our entire recorded history, Ambassador. We have wars named after everything: religions, dynasties, resources, ideologies, trade routes, succession disputes, territorial claims, and sometimes just because we didn't like each other very much." She activated a holographic display that made Zektar's exoskeleton crawl with horror. The timeline of human warfare stretched back thousands of years, an unbroken chain of conflicts ranging from tribal skirmishes to global catastrophes that had nearly ended their species multiple times. The 100 Years' War actually lasted 116 years, Dr. Hawkins noted casually. The 30 Years' War killed approximately 8 million people. World War I killed 17 million. World War II killed between 70 and 85 million, depending on how you count civilian casualties. Zektar stared at the numbers, trying to process them. Your species suffered casualties equivalent to the complete population of most civilized worlds, and you survived? We didn't just survive, Ambassador. We learned. Every conflict taught us new ways to kill each other more efficiently, which paradoxically taught us new ways to keep each other alive more effectively. Military medicine, logistics, communications technology, manufacturing techniques. Most of our major innovations came from trying to gain advantages in warfare. The tour continued over several days. Zektar visited museums dedicated to human conflicts, each one containing artifacts that would have been classified as war crimes by galactic standards. Chemical weapons, biological agents, nuclear devices capable of sterilizing continents. The humans displayed these horrors with the same academic interest that other species might show for geological samples. Why do you preserve these things? He asked while standing before a display of mustard gas canisters from something called the First World War. To remember, Dr. Hawkins replied simply. We learned long ago that the greatest danger to humanity is forgetting what we're capable of. Every generation has to understand the price of these choices. But it wasn't just the scope of human violence that disturbed Zektar, it was the creativity. Other species fought for resources, territory, or survival. Humans had elevated warfare to an art form, developing strategies and tactics that seemed to violate the basic principles of logical thinking. Explain to me, he said during a visit to the military academy at West Point, how anyone conceived of something called a false flag operation. Colonel Martinez, his guide, grinned with the same unsettling expression that seemed universal among human military personnel. Simple concept, really. You make your enemy think they're being attacked by someone else, then offer to help them fight their supposed attacker. Classic misdirection. But that requires deceiving both your enemy and your allies simultaneously. Sometimes it requires deceiving yourself too, depending on how deep you need to sell it. The key to effective deception is believing your own lies just enough to make them convincing, but not enough to trap yourself in them. Zektar spent hours trying to understand the psychological mechanisms that could produce such thinking. His own species was capable of tactical deception, but human military doctrine seemed to assume that everyone, including themselves, was constantly lying about everything. They had built entire strategic philosophies around the assumption that truth was a luxury they couldn't afford. How do you function as a society when you assume everyone is constantly deceiving everyone else? He asked Dr. Douglas Harkins during one of their sessions. We compartmentalize, she explained. We have different rules for different situations. In warfare, deception is expected and acceptable. In civilian life, we have social contracts that discourage it. In science, we have methodologies specifically designed to eliminate it. The key is knowing which context you're operating in. And when contexts overlap, then things get complicated, and we usually end up shooting each other over the disagreement. What made it even more disturbing was that humans seemed to regard this history with a mixture of pride and regret. They celebrated their military victories while simultaneously condemning the necessity of warfare. They honored their soldiers while working to prevent future conflicts. They studied their past atrocities with clinical detachment while expressing genuine horror at their own capabilities. We are what we are, Captain Chen explained during one of Zektar's regular briefings. We don't apologize for our nature, but we don't celebrate it either. Evolution made us into the ultimate persistence predators, not just physically, but mentally and socially. We don't give up, we don't stop adapting, and we never forget a lesson. The lessons, Zektar discovered, were comprehensive. Human military doctrine included detailed studies of every major conflict in their history, analyzing not just successful strategies but failed ones. They had institutionalized learning from defeat in ways that most species would find psychologically impossible. We study our losses more carefully than our victories, General Morrison explained during a strategy session. Victories can be the result of luck or enemy incompetence, but defeats teach you about your own weaknesses. Every time we lose, we ask 3 questions. Why did we lose? How can we avoid losing that way again? How can we use what we learn to make our enemies lose that way? It was during his 3rd month on Earth that Zektar finally understood what truly made humans dangerous. He was observing a military exercise when he noticed something that chilled him to his core.
The humans were practicing against themselves. Blue team versus red team, explained the exercise commander. Blue team gets to use all current doctrine and equipment. Red team gets to cheat. Cheat! They're allowed to use any tactics, any strategies, any approaches they can think of, regardless of whether they violate our own rules of engagement. The goal is to find weaknesses in our current methods by thinking like our enemies might think. Zektar watched in fascination as Red Team proceeded to violate every principle of civilized warfare he had ever learned. They used human shields, false surrender signals, biological weapons, and psychological tactics that bordered on torture. Blue Team, representing the good guys, was systematically destroyed. Red Team wins, the commander announced cheerfully, which means we just learned 17 new ways our current doctrine can be exploited. We'll incorporate countermeasures into next month's training. You deliberately teach your own soldiers to think like war criminals? We teach them to think like humans, Ambassador. Because that's what our enemies will be doing, thinking like the most creative, ruthless, persistent predators they've ever encountered. The only way to defend against human tactics is to understand human thinking. The implications hit Zektar like a physical blow. Human military training wasn't just about learning to fight. It was about learning to think like humanity's worst possible selves. Every human soldier was trained to be a war criminal, then taught the discipline to choose not to be one. This is why you defeated the Devourers so easily, he said suddenly. You weren't fighting an alien enemy. You were fighting yourselves. Captain Chen nodded approvingly. The Devourers were a hive mind focused on consumption and expansion, tactically sophisticated, but strategically predictable. They thought like an optimized biological system. We've been fighting creatures that think like that for our entire evolutionary history. They're called armies. Every strategy we used against them was originally developed for fighting other humans. Biological warfare, psychological operations, false intelligence, targeting communication networks. We learnt all of it from fighting each other. The only difference was scale. Zektar spent the next several weeks reviewing human conflicts with this new understanding. Every technique they had used against the Devourers had historical precedence in human warfare. The genetic virus was based on biological weapons used in Earth's Third World War. The psychological operations were refinements of tactics used in something called the Cold War. The false intelligence networks were evolved versions of methods used in conflicts dating back thousands of years. You didn't save the galaxy, he said to Captain Chen during one of their meetings. You exterminated a pest infestation using tools you developed for murdering your own children.
That's a very human way of looking at it, she agreed.
But yes, essentially accurate. The final piece of the puzzle came when Zektar was allowed to observe a session of what humans called wargaming. Hypothetical conflict scenarios played out by teams of strategists. The exercise he witnessed involved a simulated alien invasion of Earth by a technologically superior force. The human team assigned to play the aliens was annihilated within hours. How? Demanded the team leader playing the invading aliens. We had superior technology, superior numbers, superior positioning. We should have won easily. You thought like aliens, replied the team playing humanity. You assumed we'd fight you like a conventional military force. Instead, we fought you like humans. Zektar reviewed the scenario with growing horror. The human defenders had used every dirty trick in their extensive playbook. They'd convinced the alien forces that Earth was already infected with a plague that would kill them. They'd sabotaged their own infrastructure to deny the aliens resources, while guerrilla forces attacked supply lines. They'd used the aliens' own superior technology against them by hacking into their systems and turning their weapons on their own forces. Most disturbing of all, they'd sacrificed entire cities in false flag operations designed to convince other galactic civilizations that the aliens were genocidal maniacs who had to be stopped. You would have gotten the entire galaxy to fight your war for you, Zektar said, his voice barely a whisper. Standard human tactics when facing a superior enemy, the team leader confirmed cheerfully. Make it everyone else's problem too. That night, Zektar sent an encrypted message to the Galactic Council. His report was brief but comprehensive. Council leadership must understand. We have not gained an ally. We have successfully avoided making an enemy. The humans are not interested in conquest because they don't need to conquer us to control us. They have demonstrated that they can eliminate any threat to their interests without risking their own forces and while maintaining plausible deniability. Recommendation: do exactly what they want and hope they continue wanting things that are compatible with our survival. The response came within hours. Understood. What do they want? Zektar stared out at the peaceful Earth landscape, where children played in gardens built on soil that had been soaked with the blood of countless conflicts. Where schools taught history lessons that would traumatize most galactic civilizations. Where every adult carried in their mind the accumulated tactical knowledge of 10,000 years of creative violence. They want to be our friends, he replied. And may the gods help us all. That's probably the best possible outcome. 3 months later, humanity was granted full membership in the Galactic Council with a unanimous vote. Captain Chen was appointed as Earth's first permanent ambassador, a position that came with extensive diplomatic immunity and unlimited access to galactic infrastructure. During the ceremony, Vorthan made a speech praising humanity's contribution to galactic security and their demonstrated commitment to peace. The applause was thunderous and entirely genuine. Everyone present truly was grateful for humanity's intervention in the Devourer crisis. What none of the speakers mentioned, though everyone understood, was that they were also applauding their own survival. They had encountered a species that could have conquered them easily and chose friendship instead. The relief was overwhelming. After the ceremony, Zektar found himself standing with Captain Chen on an observation deck overlooking the council chambers. "Tell me honestly," he said. "Did your species really seek membership for peaceful purposes, or was this all an elaborate strategic operation?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, watching the celebration below. "Ambassador," she said finally, "those aren't mutually exclusive concepts for humans. We learned long ago that the most effective way to ensure our security is to make sure everyone else feels secure too. Peaceful coexistence isn't altruism for us, it's survival strategy." She turned to face him, and her pale blue eyes held the same mixture of warmth and lethal calculation that he'd learned to associate with human expressions. "We genuinely want to be good neighbors, Zekthar. But good neighbors look out for each other's interests, and they deal firmly with anyone who threatens the neighborhood's stability. And if someone does threaten that stability..." Captain Chen's smile was gentle and absolutely terrifying. "Then they'll discover why evolution's greatest mistake was teaching humans to be creative." As Zektar watched the celebration continue below, he realized that the galaxy had indeed found peace. Not the peace of mutual understanding or shared prosperity, but the peace of a predator that had chosen to become a shepherd. The humans would protect galactic civilization with the same ruthless efficiency they had once used to destroy each other. And perhaps, he thought, that was the only kind of peace that could truly last in a universe full of dangers that even the humans hadn't imagined yet. The American Boogeymen had come to the galaxy, and they had decided to be the good guys. Everyone else could only hope they never changed their minds.